Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to Food Literacy for All. The song today was for those who recognized it or those who didn't recognize it, Patti Smith, People Have the Power. We are very happy and excited today to welcome our guest speaker, Katherine Miller, who will be talking about the power of local food systems, how chefs, farmers, and advocates are rebuilding America's food economy. But before we welcome her, I would like to say a few words about the team and about our sponsors. I will start with the team itself. I'm Bénédicte Boisseron, and the co-instructor for this course is Shiloh Maples, community organizer, seat keeper, and storyteller. You were blessed with her own talk last week, and I know that we've all really much enjoyed it. The rest of the team is first the community partners that make this course possible. We have Jerry Ann Hebron from Oakland Avenue Urban Farm. We have Winona Bynum from the Detroit Food Policy Council, and we have Shakara Tyler, the Detroit Black Community Food Sovereignty Network. More team members that make this course possible. We have Sammy, who is the Food Literacy for All course coordinator, Taylor, or graduate student instructor, Sai, or SFSI, Sustainable Food Systems Initiative coordinator, and Dr. Leslie Hoy, or SFSI Advisory Committee, Chris Taylor, or DJ Chris Taylor, from everything having to do with technology, and Tiffany Harris, or Grader. And just a few more words about our sponsors. The Food Literacy for All is presented by Sustainable Food Systems Initiative with generous support from the Center for the Education of Women, Francis and Sydney Lewis Visiting Leaders Fund, the School for Environment and Sustainability, SEAS, and the Program in the Environment, PITE. And engagement, you can find us on Instagram and on X, and the poll questions are on iClicker for students only. And all classes are filmed and available on the SFSI website. And here it is, the presentation for today, our student response by Sasso K. A little bit of issue playing it. Let me go back and try again.
Hi everyone, my name is Sasha Krasowski, and this week I will be discussing the USDA Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, also known as the LFPA program. This program is a $900 million initiative program that bridges the gap between local farms and food insecure communities. Now, when I first heard this number of 900 million, I was like, that's a big number, but I don't know how much. So I found some examples just to put into perspective how much funding this program is actually worth. With the population of the United States being roughly 333 million, if you take that 900 million and divide by the 333, you get roughly $2.70. So you could buy every single person in America a sundae from McDonald's. One thing I found most interesting about this article is it mentioned that the US LFPA program generated $1.53 billion in local economic activity, which goes to show this program not only helps communities directly with food, but also helps stimulate economies in other cities. Thus, this program helps exemplify how thoughtful investments can help transform the food systems in the United States. Do you think this should be a global-wide thing?
Thank you very much, Sasso, for this great response of
Hi,
the
everyone.
week. And now it's my pleasure to welcome Taylor, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. Thanks again to our students for such wonderful video submissions. It's always so difficult to choose just one, so I really appreciate that every week. Today, we have Katherine Miller here with us. Katherine is a proven expert in helping foundations, nonprofits, and socially responsible companies connect with consumers, activists, and other partners through strategic programs and communications. Katherine spent several years as the James Beard Foundation's Vice President of Impact, working with food system leaders to create new and innovative programs that address gender equity, sustainability, food waste, and child nutrition. She is the author of At the Table, The Chef's Guide to Advocacy. I have a little blip in my bio here, but she developed the Chef's Boot Camp for Policy and Change. This must have been with James Beard Foundation. Is that right, Katherine? Okay, great. The Waste Not campaign and the Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program. She is assigned Institute of Politics and Policy Fellow at the American University and the Turker Distinguished Fellow at the George Washington University, both in DC. She is the principal and founder of Table 81, and her book At the Table was nominated for a James Beard Foundation Media Award. Katherine, we're so lucky to have you here with us today. Before we move into your talk, we're going to do our viewer engagement through the polling feature and iClicker. So again, if you're a student in the class taking the course for a grade, now's the time to open up iClicker. If you're a community member, you'll engage with this question through the Zoom polling feature. So I'm starting the poll now. So the question is, local food is food produced X miles away in the United States. A, 50 miles away, B, 250 miles away, or C, 400 miles away. And I can sort of see what the community members are guessing and what students are guessing here on my end. Once we get almost everybody's answers in, I'll share those results with you. All right, so on the community side, we had almost 50% of folks say 50 miles away. About 40% of folks said 250 miles away, and 13% of folks said 400 miles away. As for our students, we had about 28% of folks say 50 miles away, 45% of folks say 250 miles away, and about 26% of folks say 400 miles away. So the correct answer here is 400 miles away. And I'm sure Katherine will have more to share with us about this and many more wonderful things. So Katherine, I will hand the mic over to you.
Thanks so much, Taylor, and thanks to the whole team in this program. It's exciting to see all of the folks that are involved with putting this on, and I really am very appreciative to be here. I always love doing things related to Michigan, and especially things that are supported or in partnership with any part of Detroit. Spent a fair bit of time in that lovely city, so it's great. And I will get into this. The correct answer is actually the USDA definition of local food is 400 miles, within 400 miles or within the same state. So this is one of the challenges we face when we're trying to remake our food system. And we'll get into that. But before we do, I just would love to set a couple of baseline points for you guys. This talk is going to focus on chefs and farmers and things that are happening to rebuild America's food economy. If you ever want to reach out to me, there's a question that I haven't answered, or you're more than welcome to email me. You're also more than welcome. I'm on Table 81 across all the social platforms. So please feel free, if I don't answer a question tonight or you want to have a deeper discussion, please feel free to reach out to me. But just a little bit of scene setting. I subscribe to the theory that food is one of the single most important subjects that we could ever talk about, and we do a lot of our choices related to food sometimes without even thinking about them, thinking about the consequences of those choices. And for me and for other food advocates, the idea of food is power, right? It is as laid out for us in Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Four Freedoms. It is freedom from want, right? Food is something that we need every day. Too much of the wrong types of food may kill us, but not enough food could kill us. So it is freedom from want. It is also the freedom of opportunity. Food systems around the world are often the places where people go for their first jobs, continue family and cultural traditions, and create new opportunities, right? And in large parts of the world, and even here in the United States, sustenance farming and local farming is an economic opportunity for folks. So food is also an opportunity. It's health, and it is the freedom from diet-related diseases. We've heard a lot about over the last few months, this idea of moving from ultra-processed foods or high-sugar foods and the impacts of that. And we'll talk about this a tiny bit. I'll talk about this within the talk, but food actually impacts our body chemistries and can have serious impacts on our health and our ability to move about the world. Food is also community. I love to set a good table with interesting people and bring people together to talk about um, it, our hopes and our dreams, but also some of the tough things in life. And so when you come together across food, it is the opportunity to bridge so many divides in our world right now. And then if we change our food system, we can change a lot of things. So food for me equals change. So food is absolutely a powerful ecosystem. It impacts our lives in so much. It is also one of the most fraught political topics that we have. There's a lot of politics around who gets fed, who has access to food, how much that food costs, what types of food are available. Um, and food is often used as a weapon of war, a weapon of control. And this is a picture of former President Barack Obama uh, um, and Anthony Bourdain, who was a mentor and a champion for so many. And this is a quote from Tony about the idea of food as political. There's nothing more political than food. Food is a reflection, maybe the most direct and obvious reflection of who we are, where we come from, what we love, who eats in the country, and who does not. The things that we eat are the direct reflection of our histories. The ingredients, whether they're dried, pickled, or preserved, these are reflections of often long, very painful histories. That's how we got to these dishes, right? So the idea of food as a political subject, the control it exerts over people's, that can be exerted over people's lives, the histories that it holds, the traditions that it holds, the challenges that it holds. So that is where I start my work, is completely grounded in those two things, that food is power, but food is also very political. We're going to talk about local food systems, but this is a wheel that I'm sure all of you are familiar with. You probably have it on your own bulletin board in your house, right? That our global food system is comprised of the people, businesses, environments, consumers that make up this process. The idea of how we produce food, how we actually process it, how we then distribute it, where we can access it, how we consume it, and how it's recovered, and how the whole cycle begins again, right? So that it is, you can do this wheel for whether you're looking at meat consumption or meat production. You can do it if you're looking at fruits and vegetables. This is the general wheel that we all look at, right? And there are also some things about our food system that I always like to ground people in, which is that food, as I said, is incredibly powerful and it's very critical. It's also very complicated, right? Those politics of it. So these are just a few stats, some you may be familiar with, right? In the United States, the economic power, more than 10% of all jobs are within the food system in some way. It could be a farmer, it could be a restaurateur, it could be somebody who works in a grocery store, who works in a meat packing plant, right? So we're looking at about 22 million jobs within the food system, right? The value of our global food system is somewhere around $8 trillion, 10% of the overall global economy. So the way that food is produced and moves around the world is actually a huge economic driver. We also manage to feed somewhere 5-6 billion people. So the system works efficiently and effectively. It is also a system that is rife with child labor, modern day slavery, wage inequities, gender inequities, right? Like this is not a perfect system in any way, shape, or form. It is also a system that accounts for 34% or so of our greenhouse gas emissions, right? It is a major contributor to human-caused climate change. We also, of all that money that goes into the system, we waste about $1 trillion of it worldwide. In the United States, the average family wastes over the course of a year about $1,200 of food that's purchased but not consumed. And that is literally like setting fire to a pan of food, right? Setting fire to dollar bills to that tune. And we're wasting that food and we're wasting that money at the same time when about a quarter of our population, global population, is food insecure. They don't know where their next meal is coming from on a regular basis, right? In the United States, that includes somewhere around 14 million children, right? So we have, it is an ecosystem that is incredibly important when it comes to the economic drivers or societal drivers, but it is also just rife with challenges. It is also, because of politics and policy, an artificially cheap uh, an artificially cheap thing, right? We often might think that it's expensive, but actually, when we think about all of the externalities and all of the things that happen as a result of this food system, it is actually, we spend about $1 trillion in the US, and it's actually costing us about $3 trillion. And those are costs in healthcare, there are costs in lost wages, there are the costs of the environmental impacts, right? So this is a system that is propped up by subsidies, by policy decisions, by policy choices. And so one of the things is like, how do we do something different? And I have over my 10, 12 plus years of working exclusively in food, and another 20 years and working in sort of politics, advocacy, and other things, have come to realize the real power of the local food system. And so I'm going to move into that, but we have a quick another poll for you.
Yes, we do. I'm going to change slides over to that poll question.
Great.
And then I will open the poll question in iClicker for students. And we will open the poll question for community members through Zoom. So poll question number 2, how much does the average American spend on groceries each week? I know I've seen this number change in my young adulthood, so it's interesting to
I
see.
think it'll be surprising. Not to give it away.
Okay, so we'll give this maybe 10 to 15 more seconds, but just go into what the community members are guessing. We have 4% of folks guessing $50 per person per week. 60% of people are saying $100 per person per week on groceries, and 37% of folks are saying $200 per person per week on groceries. The numbers look pretty similar on the classroom side of things. We've got 9% of folks saying A, 50% of folks saying B, and 40% of folks saying C. I feel like living in Ann Arbor, maybe this looks different from other places in the US, so curious to find out. But the correct answer here is A, $50. So Katherine, enlighten us.
Yeah, so much like the question around where your food travels, the idea that it's we always feel like it's closer than it is, and it's actually much farther. We think that on average, we spend so much more on food because many of us are in privileged environments, or make different decisions about our food, right? So maybe we eat out to restaurants more, and so we spend maybe less on our home grocery bill. Maybe we live in an environment where we buy a lot of things from a big box store, right? And there are some folks that buy exclusively for farmers markets where the food might be more expensive. So the average kind of ranges somewhere between $36 and $50. And again, it's an average. It takes all of the factors, and it doesn't necessarily look at, that number doesn't look at what the average is in New York City versus Ann Arbor versus Des Moines. It just is a national average, but we do spend a lot on groceries. But a lot of those, there's an offset to it, right? So as we get into the power of food and we look at sort of this, I got a little ahead of myself. Sorry. There we go. So that local food system, when we think about the power of local food, the local food system is identical to that global food system, right? But when we're talking about the local food system, when we're talking about the things that we have direct relationships within our own communities, within our own states, within the boundaries of the places that we live, it's the same things are happening, right? We're growing food, we're harvesting food, we're packing food, we're transporting food, we're retailing food, we're eating food, we're disposing of food, right? So that the system actually doesn't look any different. But where it starts to look different, if we think about even our own roles and how we spend those dollars each week, Buying local, buying closer to home actually matters financially. Farmers earn more. About 40% of the American people will actually have been surveyed by Gallup and have said they would actually pay a premium for identified local ingredients, things that they know where the farmer, the fisherman, the producer is, and that they have some line of sight onto that, right? So farmers will actually earn more if you buy more locally, because they also are able to keep more of the prices and potentially charge a premium for it. Economies will grow if we think about local food. A number of studies look at this, and for every dollar that you spend in a local community, you actually are sort of generating a circular investment of around $3, somewhere between $2.67 and $3, right? So when we buy locally and support local businesses, we're actually helping grow the overall economy in our area, right? And our communities are healthier, right? There is a lower level of diet-related diseases because often when we're buying more closer to where we live, we're buying less ultra-processed foods, we're buying less high fructose corn syrup foods. We are buying things that are potentially healthier for us, right? More nutritionally dense foods, more fruits and vegetables, maybe meats grown without hormones or antibiotics, those types of things. So right, buying local actually does matter in this context, right? It is also in Michigan, just to give you an example, the reading was on the local food assistance program that was created by USDA in the last administration. And as was laid out in the reading, is about nearly $1 trillion program itself. About $21 million came to Michigan over the last couple of years to support this program. But in part because when we look at Michigan, as you all know, agriculture and food production is incredibly important to this state. You are one of the biggest, Michigan is one of the biggest producers of things like cherries, blueberries, different vegetables, also syrups, fish from the, right? There's a whole food economy. It contributes about $100 billion to the state economy. And at the same time, we are losing Michigan farms and farmers. We lost 500 farms in the last 5 years. A lot of those were farmers, small farmers and farmers of color. And you also have about a 12 to 13% of the Michigan population that's food insecure, right? So food is incredibly important here in Michigan to the local economy. It's also, in some cases, worth more outside of the state of Michigan than it is worth inside the state of Michigan. And at the same time, you're seeing a sort of erosion of those local farms. You're seeing these steady rates of food insecurity. And so the local food assistance program was put in place to help stop that. And the state of Michigan has gotten about $21 million since 2020. That money went to support 200 plus producers, farmers, fishermen, and others. It's also meant that farmers and producers in all 83 counties in Michigan have benefited from this program, as have your local food banks, because in many cases, this has been a partnership to have farmers and producers grow and produce things that can be utilized by food banks, food charities, and also by schools. Right. And so that money is staying in the local economy. It's also going to benefit the residents of the local economy. It is going to help alleviate some of that hunger and that food insecurity. So that is the power of just like the raw power of investing in a local food system. Right. And that's here in Michigan. There are a number of areas of action when we think about the power of food systems. I always think about the sort of trifecta, right? How are we impacting sourcing? How is local food contributing to the strengthening of our communities? And what are the policies and practices that we need to put into place to help strengthen our local food systems, right? So we're going to start with audience Q&A. So there's questions coming up. Guys, do you want me to stop and take them now or just take them at the end? I'll keep going.
You're good. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah, sorry, Sammy. I saw that popped up. I was like, um, right. So I'm going to start with community because this is a big one and also can be a little bit amorphous. But this is a wonderful quote from Jose Andres, the founder of World Central Kitchen, one of the most iconic and well-respected chefs in the world, who created a relief organization to help feed people at times of need, and for that food to come from their local communities, prepared by people from their local communities. And I love this quote from him. Sometimes big problems have simple solutions. Chefs were people of action. We didn't think big, we thought small. We started with 10,000 meals, and we see what we can do today, and we see what we can do tomorrow, right? And so when we think about community, this idea that all of those, the work, being able to use local workers, local producers to feed local people in a time of need, it's just such a wonderful story. I seem to have lost my ability to control the slides. It's okay. I'll just keep talking while somebody gets them back. And so one of the things that we look at also within that community perspective is this idea of networks. One of the most powerful tools for community and for strengthening our local food systems are organizations like Eastern Market in Detroit, food policy councils around the country. There are food policy councils now in over 1,000 cities around the United States. Specific in one of the examples is in state of North Carolina, right? Where in each of the different regions, whether it's in the Triad region, the Western region, the Charlotte region, Triangle region, there are coalitions of people who come together. There you go. Perfect. Thanks. You can see this map, right? And so in each of the regions of North Carolina, and you would see this in every state in the country, right? It's this powerful story of networks. We are looking at community-based groups who are coming together to solve the problems that are particularly of need in that community. And so you have food banks coming together with religious or organizations that are coming together with community service organizations or to provide wraparound services. But again, all driven from the local economy and all that idea that if you spend that money locally, what it benefits in terms of a follow-on economic impact. So community is incredibly important, and we've seen groups come together all over the country to try and come up with different solutions for different problems. We also look at policy. We have the food policies. In some ways, policy is a conscious choice. We vote for the politicians then make decisions, and those decisions are directly impact our lives, right? So if we are not paying attention to food on the ballot or food in those policy halls, we're really not actually sitting at that table. And that can be challenging because, and I'll use the current hot example of eggs, right? But our eggs are controlled at the larger national, international level by the policies that are put in place to protect the health and safety of the animals, the health and safety of the consumers who buy them, and then also the health and safety of the farmers in terms of marketing supports, right? And when we look at eggs, particularly like, let's just say within the United States context, right? We have 20 different federal departments and agencies that oversee the policies related to these eggs. There are 30 different policies that impact food safety. There are 15 different federal agencies that play some part in implementing the laws and the regulation. And that's everything from the internal agencies of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration to the overall USDA. And it's kind of a funny thing because FDA regulates the safety of the eggs in the shell. The USDA regulates the safety of the eggs removed from the shell. And then the USDA also runs the program that markets the eggs for folks. So policy is incredibly important. And as we look at something like the local food purchasing assistance program that was part of this reading, that was a federal policy put into place by the last administration. So policy not only controls the rules of the plate, it controls the money that helps put that food on the plate. So I always like to think about policy, and there's a challenge sometimes that we think about policy as partisan, potentially, right? Republican or Democrat, right? And we also have to think about the voices and the need for people to get involved in that. So we'll talk a little bit about one Chef Michel Michon, but I just always want to stress that if you work in food, if you study food, if you're a restaurant worker, if you're a farmer, the Americans actually want to hear from you on these issues. We sometimes are like, oh no, I'm not going to get involved, or no, like, but 74% of Americans, as a result of a Gallup poll, believe that the food and beverage industry should be a more active participant in the broader debate over solutions to food and nutrition policy. So just as you think about all of these things, and maybe you're like, oh, what do I do? How can I make a difference? Just using your voice will help make a difference in these policy calls and these policy decision making. Because policy is also a process. I'm sure some of you have seen this. This is often my favorite board game to play, which is how does a bill become a law? There are, a number of steps any bill needs to take, and so this opportunity to engage on policy is something that we both need and see more of people getting involved in, because it can be an incredibly convoluted process. It can take a long time. And so we really actually need people involved in it. It is also an area that is controlled by different interests. There are lots of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. or in our state capitals, right, where paid lobbyists are advocating on behalf of things. They're often advocating on behalf of not local food systems. They're often advocating on behalf of corporations and businesses and others. And the lobbying industry in the United States is worth about $4 billion a year. And so that ant trail of lobbyists who are coming in and are talking to members of Congress or to state legislators or the governors or your mayor, aren't necessarily they're only prioritizing the things that can participate and compete in this system of paid lobbying. So we need more citizen voices. So if local food is something that you care about, if that economic benefit, if that strengthening the communities, if those healthier people are something that you care about, I think we all need to think about how we engage in this system, and certainly at this time, how we engage in this system. This is no different. That this convoluted, indirect way to do federal policy is the same at the state level, right? This is a map of how to get to a policy change in California. And at the city level, this is it's Nashville, Tennessee, Davidson County, and these are all of the points of decision making that something has to go through to become a law or an ordinance or a regulation in the city and state and federal level. So it's a lot of steps, and it can be pretty exhausting. But I'll just continue to put my pitch in that we need these citizen voices in this conversation. Sorry, that's my voice. And we're starting to see more folks take on this idea at the state and federal level related to local food and advocacy around local food. So if you're interested, looking at things like the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, Wholesome Way, which I'm going to talk about in just a second, Food Research and Action Center, the Union for Concerned Scientists, organizations like the J.S. Beard Foundation that I used to work at, the National Black Farmers Association. There are hundreds of legacy, but also new organizations that are getting into this fight and sort of making this case for a system that is not consolidated, that is not benefiting just large scale agriculture, but actually has that ability to benefit local businesses, create local jobs, and contribute to the healthier community. And I'll probably sound like a broken record related to that. Then we look at sourcing, right? And how those decisions that we make are related to sourcing, how those move, and different ways that you can show up in terms of local food systems, right? And so This, I like this quote, right, related to a campaign that's called Change Menus, Change Lives, right? This is choosing to eat fewer animal products is probably the most important action an individual can take to reverse global warming. It is known and significant effect on the environment, and done collectively would push the culture and marketplace with a force with any march. The thing that I'll just stress here is it's not no animal products, right? It's fewer animal products. And fewer often combined with better animal products that are produced by smaller farmers, that are produced by smaller ranchers that aren't in confined animal feeding operations, those types of things, right? So if we change the menu, we can actually change people's lives, their livelihood, right? This is showing up in some efforts related to what is called good food purchasing, right? So there is a campaign around good food purchasing that looks at the environmental impact, the impact on wages, the impact on local economies, the impact on animal welfare, and many things. And this is a program, the good food purchasing program, encourages states and local governments to create opportunities for producers to sell to institutional food service. And institutional food service includes prisons, hospitals, and schools, right? These are places that traditionally are funded by government money, or at least subsidized by government money. And often that money has not been spent locally. It has not been spent on good food purchases, purchases that are climate smart, purchases where animal welfare standards are considered, right? And so this campaign and movement, which is now in about 20 states around the country, has a lot of literature around it if you haven't heard about it or thought about it. And so even just in the first couple of years of the program, it's been able to move, and you can see the stats on the slide, it's been able to move about $56 million to local economies, to local farmers and producers. It's been able to shift spending related towards products that are certified, animal welfare certified, by about $1.2 million. It's also been able to shift things like routine animals raised without routine antibiotics by about $20 million, about $10 million directed towards products that are more environmentally sustainable, so maybe produced under regenerative standards or using indigenous foodways as an example. And it's also helped contribute about $32 million in wages. And so that's just one city and over just the last couple of years. And so we can see this progress, right? We can see the idea if you can move this, if you can encourage government institutions who are spending taxpayer money on food to redirect their spending and the good that that can have in the world and in your own community. So that is the concept of good food purchasing and sourcing. That brings me to Chef Michel Nichon. He's one of the co-founders of an organization that's called Wholesome Wave. They're active across the United States, and they first came to prominence because one of the things that they realized was that about 25 years ago, people who were selling their products in farmers markets could not take credit cards and they couldn't take EBT or SNAP benefits, right? Because the technology wasn't there. And so the lack of that technology was leading to everything from shaming of people walking into a farmer's market and they would have to get a voucher and then they'd have to use the voucher in the line. And so maybe they didn't want to do that. They felt like they stood out or there was some sort of stigma. It also meant that they just didn't go because it couldn't take the card in a way. So Wholesome Wave and Michel and the founders of that organization came together and they identified that as a major barrier to the idea of using public dollars at local farmers markets. And they worked to pass legislation that was replicated across all 50 states that allow farmers markets to take EBT and SNAP benefits. And it also led to the revolution of now you can tap your card on the square at the local farmers market. They also helped create a thing that are known as FINI grants, food innovation and nutrition investment grants. These are local grants that encourage the additional use of public dollars to buy locally produced fruits and vegetables. So sometimes it's known as a double up program. Sometimes it's known as a 2-for-1 program. Sometimes it's known as a prescription produce program. But the idea is the same, right? That by encouraging people to use the dollars provided at a federal level or at a state level, whether it's through Medicaid or Medicare, whether it's in relation to a diabetes or a pre-existing condition, that idea that there would be a prescription provided to you that would provide you with additional dollars to buy healthier food, and prioritizing those healthier food purchases at the local level. So that was another innovation of Wholesome Wave. And Chef Michel Nichon is a great mentor of mine, and he has mentored hundreds of chefs around the country. In their policy work, he works along the lines of a bipartisan, nonpartisan approach. He is sort of tireless in this work, and he once worked with the actor Paul Newman on Newman's Own, which was a social enterprise that encouraged people to buy better products, and then the proceeds of those products went into a charity through that sort of circular economy. And so, I would encourage you, if you don't know about Wholesome Wave, to look at the work that they've done, but especially related to the produce prescriptions and the double up bucks on fruits and vegetables, because it is another innovative way of how we're using government dollars to power local economies in a very new and unique way. He's also doing this at the large scale. I think one of the challenges that we face is this perception that local food is precious, or even local food is expensive, right? It can be, but there are ways to reduce those costs. There are ways to offset those costs. And there are also ways that those products can go into larger scale efforts. So Wholesome Wave has a brand called Wholesome Crave. It is a plant-based soup. They do large-scale catering and institutional food service. All the revenue of that organization, of that company, goes back into the nonprofit arm of Wholesome Wave. And now they're working with dozens of institutional and university clients all over the world. They have some work in the Nestle kitchens, University of Massachusetts and Amherst. But there's about a dozen schools that they're working with, and it's an exciting program because they source produce from a local community. The soup is produced in a local environment, and then it is sent to institutions in those areas. And so it's a great example of a for-profit way to do this, and to actually help kind of move us from thinking about this local as something precious, something that only certain people have access to, because now we have the ability to make local food more available to a larger community of folks through, whether it's a consumer packaged goods, whether it's through a farmer's market and the technology, whether it's through public policy related to food bucks or prescription produce. So, one of the formulas that Michel looks at, and this was whether he was working on the Food Insecurity and Nutrition Incentive grants, the FINI grants, whether he was working on Farm Bill legislation, right? Whether he was working on programs like GUSNIP, which was named for Gus Schumacher, that it expands access to affordable fruits and vegetables for folks. He's sort of always looking at this thing. What are the chefs that he can involve? Because chefs make great ambassadors. They're very good at translating the ingredient to the plate to the impact. He's always looking at this idea of ingredients. What can you get? And how do you turn that into something that people will enjoy, right? Because one of the things we also sometimes overlook in food is people want to eat things that are delicious to them, right? People want to eat things that create food memories and invoke food memories. And so, in the case of Wholesome Wave and Wholesome Crave, those ingredients translated into fresh soup, right? And then because he got his start in restaurants, he could see like how you take local food, those ingredients, how you put them to work in a restaurant. And then he's able to translate that process into something as big as institutional purchasing. How do we get that fresh soup? How can chefs be the best ambassadors for the use of locally sourced, delicious, fresh soup that's produced and that is then served in schools, hospitals, prisons, and other places, right? Or in corporate dining rooms. So that's an exciting piece. And I think it's such a great example of when we take those unique voices and how those unique voices can help us move to a path that really prioritizes the idea of local food and all the different ways that it can show up. This is a quote from Michel, and it really speaks to his personal motivation. And so I always love to share this, right? He wanted to leverage 4 decades of experience to design a plant-based approach to scaled food service using real vegetables, grains, and legumes, along with cultural authenticity and respect to feel delicious products that help institutions address some of the most vexing challenges created by our current food system. The products naturally address climate change, biodiversity, and cultural authenticity. So again, when we're looking at these things, it doesn't have to be something precious and distant. It doesn't have to be something that is devoid of personality and flavor. It doesn't have to be out of the reach of the average consumer who is not spending as much money on food or groceries as some of us are, right? And so I always just think it's a beautiful example of that. Just the last couple of things that I'll leave you with before I close out this talk and get to actually hearing some questions and seeing if I've awakened any sleeping dogs or brought you any ideas that you're really interested in digging into. But I do want to remind you that food is this incredibly complicated system, right? It's hard to rip out and completely redesign our food system. We need to, it's sort of like ripping out your heart. If you ripped out your heart, you better have something to put in place or you'll die, right? We can't just rip out the food system and destroy it because how will people eat, right? We're redoing this. So local food systems also give us a system that's already in place that if we utilize it and maximize it, we can create great benefits for the people, the planet, and the communities. And so local food systems really, really matter. And everything is in place for us, right? We have powers as consumers to make different choices. We have the ability to use our voice to shape public policy or let our voices be known. Food is one of our most dominant cultures. It's the thing that, impacts all of our lives, probably more than sometimes we even think about it. And that there are ways for us to get involved in this strengthening as well, to follow the lead of the folks like your partners here in Detroit, those community-based groups in North Carolina, folks like Chef Jose Andres or Chef Michel Michon, or all of the myriad of farmers that are out producing the food that we eat every day. And so there are ways for each of us on this webinar to get involved. So with that, I'm going to take a sip of water and I'm going to turn it over to questions and hope that I maybe came up like 6 minutes short, Sammy. But yeah, so I'd love to just take questions.
So before we take,
yeah, this is great. Yeah, go ahead, Tyler.
I'm going to go into poll question number 3, which is basically just gauging where the audience is at, where your priorities are for changing the food system. Do you see yourself stepping in at the policy level? Do you see yourself working at the farm level or supporting local farmers? Do you see yourself working at the community organizing level or something else? If it's something else, click D and then type your answer into the chat, although I don't know if we have the chat open here. Sammy, do we have the chat open on this webinar or just Q&A?
Yes, it's open.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, on the community side of the poll, sorry, 50% of folks are interested in engaging at the local farm level, supporting local farmers. 23% of community members are interested in engaging in policy change, and 27% are interested in community organizing. As for our students, it looks like a pretty similar distribution here. 44% of folks are interested in supporting local farmers. 33% are interested in policy change. 23% are interested in community organizing. And on both ends, there's just 1% of people who are interested in something else. So pretty exciting. We are moving on to questions now, and just checking in on who's running questions. It is Sammy. Sammy, take it away.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine, for that talk and sharing more about sourcing, community efforts, and policy as well, which I'm sure is top of mind for many right now. So I'll just go through some of the key questions we're getting in the Q&A, and thank you to those that are sharing those questions. So the first question I wanted to bring up is from Emily. And Emily was wondering, so they went to undergrad in Iowa, and they shared that that's a huge producer of corn, and most of the corn in the state is going towards animal feed, corn syrup, and diesel. So can you share more about, maybe on a consumer level, how can we ensure that more food is going to actually feeding people instead of products?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And we'll start to see over probably the coming decade also a reuse of corn and other oils produced at mass level for airline fuel, actually. That's the new big trend, right? There's a couple of things. One, in the federal policy context, the majority of money goes to support large scale farming. There's very little money that's spent on what's called so-called specialty crops and vegetables, which are fruits and vegetables that are not grown at scale. And so I think, one, we just need to show that there's consumer demand for those things. Iowa is actually a great example. I would encourage you, if you're interested in, I would encourage you in two things. One, the Wallace Center that published the report that you all got as a pre-read actually has a number of state-based spotlights. So they have a spotlight on Michigan, on Iowa, the sort of Great Lakes region, and they really looked at the number of producers and farmers in the areas who were selling at that smaller scale level and what the impact of those dollars were. So it's a complicated question because a lot of those large scale agricultural interests are subsidized and have crop insurance and crop protections that support them. And really the only way to start to break up those monopolies is to buy differently. And the other way to do it is also to is to practice shareholder activism. So if anybody ever wants to talk about how to take on a company related to making changes, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, it's a complicated one.
Thank you. The shareholder activism, that's something I'll have to look more into. And that kind of connects with another question. This is from Danielle. They were wondering, is good food purchasing a form of community wealth building? Maybe if you're familiar with community wealth building, do you know if there's intersection between those two?
Yeah, there's definitely some soft, direct relationships between organizations that are focused on that and organizations that are focused on good food purchasing. I will say that it was set up as an entity to move the purchasing of federal dollars and the move the dollars to different buckets, right? So it wasn't necessarily set up in that way initially. We are seeing, and it'll be interesting what happens over the next couple of years, but there was some movement in 2022, 2023, 2024 around good food purchasing, looking at values-based procurement, right? And so much more intentionality towards the supports for socially disadvantaged farmers, women, veterans, BIPOC farmers and producers in a way that was about keeping that money into their local areas or into a certain population. So both of those things. So it was not an intentional design in the early days of good food purchasing, but it has certainly been both a side benefit and then something that was being addressed with a little bit more intentionality over the last couple of years.
Thank you. Related to the shareholders that you mentioned earlier. Before we move on from that, Anna was curious if there's resources about moving companies with shareholders, if you have any websites or literature.
Yeah, so one of the best is the international NGO Oxfam. Oxfam does an annual report called Beyond the Brands, which looks at food consolidation around the world. So it looks at this idea that, you know, fewer than a dozen companies control most of the large scale brands, right? And they have this amazing visual map of what that looks like. So you know, and that all goes to corporate consolidation. And so they run a number of shareholder advocacy campaigns asking for people to make different changes or practices, to source differently, maybe adopt a fair trade logo. The biggest social movement and shareholder movement of the last 3 or 4 years, though, has been actually focused on chocolate as an ingredient. So you're seeing a lot of companies that produce candies, chocolates, come under a lot of tough scrutiny and a lot of demand for them to change their sourcing, whether it's through wage, whether it's through certificate, you know, buying from certified organic or certified fair trade companies. And you're seeing a little bit of that also at the corporate level. I'd say it's a funny playbook to look at, but both Penzi and Patagonia have some great corporate advocacy, their own corporate advocacy campaigns that are good blueprints for if you're looking at how to take on corporates or how corporates should act differently. But certainly Oxfam's sort of the gold standard related to shareholder activism and the look at consolidation. And I would also highly recommend Chloe Servino's book on meat. She looked at the consolidation within the meat industry in a really intense way. She's a reporter for Forbes. I'm blanking on the name of the book, but it's Chloe Servino, and you can look it up. And it's a great, I think it's Meat, something like that. But it's a great book on consolidation on that level too.
Thank you. I'll also plug that on March 18th, we'll be hearing from Austin Frerick from his book on barons. So for anyone interested in learning more about corporate consolidation in the food industry, definitely come on March 18th for that talk. And I also want to apologize. I believe the chat is disabled, so apologies for that. But we'll keep using the Q&A for questions. The next question we have is from Leonardo, and they're wondering, given the White House shift in focusing away from climate and equity food production, how do you envision future strategies in managing expected funding shortfalls?
Yeah, I mean, the last 20 days have been a really, not even 20 days, have been a really interesting journey. And we're looking at USDA. USDA is just starting to see some of the impacts. Most of it is coming in. There was a pool of funding in which the local food purchasing agreement came out of, which the Inflation Reduction Act and the Biden administration, which is some of the greatest strides that we've made in funding farmers to farm new ways, fishermen to fish in new ways, a look at sort of the wage and disparities among meat processors and other farm workers, agricultural workers. And so there was a lot of money designated in those things. Unfortunately, the money was not spent, or it wasn't distributed before this new administration has come in. So they've put a halt on those dollars, and they're looking at different ways to allocate those dollars. They have made a lot of public statements about wanting to erase climate or wokeness or other things from those programs. So I think that we will initially see those money, and there was a lot of farmer backlash from more institutional farmers, long established farmers who were like, all this money is going to new farmers. Where's my money? And ignoring the fact that they get crop supports and crop insurance and all those things. But the emotion of it ran pretty high during the Biden administration. If I'm holding out some hope related to this administration and some of the focus that it will have, the first Trump administration did have a heavy focus on local food disbursements. A lot of it did go to large scale farmers. So I think smaller farmers are going to have to be more vocal. But there was a heavy investment made at the local level in the first Trump administration. pre-COVID. And then a lot of money flowed in the last year of that administration locally. So I kind of pulled out a little bit of hope that they see the power of American grown food, locally grown food, and the economic benefits of local food. But yeah, there are a lot of farmers that are not going to be able to pay the debts that they've taken on for the transition that they thought was going to be guaranteed by federal funding. Forward contracting and purchasing that was put in place is that money might not flow. So yeah, I have this little bit of hope, and then I have a lot of fear that at some point in the next 3 or 4 years, we may be looking at a farm crisis on par with the 80s. So that's my doomsayer response.
Yeah, definitely a lot in motion right now. But there is some hope for sure with, I think, both sides, Republicans and Democrats. Most people want to feed their children local food, so there is some solidarity around it. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen a rise in the sort of mom influencer and a return and a move away from ultra processed foods on a social media, a rise in that social media. The money and funding behind the Make America Healthy Again movement really focused on, ending the dependence on sugar, moving people towards healthier diets. There are some real challenges there are some real potential pitfalls in each of those things that food systems advocates need to probably think about, right? Because this is potentially an administration that will put more money into local food systems at the same time they're mass deporting farm and agricultural workers. At the same time, they're enacting tariffs that will drive the cost of food up, right? So there are some things to be hopeful for. I just hope everybody keeps a critical eye on all the pieces on the board. Right. And I think it goes to one of your questions about, are there 20 agencies that are necessary, right, for eggs? And is there waste and inefficiencies in the system? And I would say absolutely yes. This is a system that is built to do exactly what it was meant to do, which is to feed the most people the most calorically dense food at the cheapest price in a way that is convenient to them. That is what our food system is meant to do. It is not optimized for health. It is not optimized for climate. It is not optimized for local economies. And so, can we be looking for better ways to streamline and reduce waste in government programs? Absolutely. But as the point that I last said, right, when it closed out, was that you can't rip out a heart and expect the patient to live. And in this case, you can't unilaterally destroy the farm support systems that are in place and expect farmers to survive. So we just have to have all our pieces, we just have to eye on all the pieces on the board.
yeah, great points. Another policy related question from Abigail. They're wondering if there was one thing you could add, remove, or change in the next farm bill, what would it be? You were able to decide.
Oh, if I had a thing, I mean, the thing that I'm advocating for and have spent the last couple of years advocating for is a requirement that if the dollar is a public dollar, that it must be optimized to benefit a local US community, right? It is unconscionable that in places like Sacramento or Iowa or even in Michigan, that the food is worth more outside of the state that it is grown in, and that there are people who don't have access to that food in a meaningful way. And so every public dollar, in my opinion, if I had a magic pen, every dollar that the US government spent on food would have to be prioritized on local and regional food purchases. And it would transform everything.
Yeah.
If I had a genie.
If only, yeah.
If only.
The next question we have, they're wondering, so if good food purchasing practices are meant to support federally funded or subsidized institutions, what programs similar to that exist for nonprofits or not-for-profits? In what ways could organizations such as food banks employ good food purchasing practices to support local communities while reducing food insecurity and food waste?
Yeah, so if this is an area that's of great interest, I encourage you to look at an organization out of New York State called the Roundtable, which is a coalition of 8 emergency food providers that serve the entire all the boroughs of New York City, right? And it is a group of organizations who are essentially prioritizing the good food purchasing guidelines in their buying of food for their food banks and food pantry, right? Because that's the thing. Like I think many people think about food banks and food pantries as sort of like donation locations, like oh the can drive or the food drive at school, right? These are businesses, and they buy millions of dollars of food in a city every year, right? They also depend on corporate food donations. So it's like why you would go into a food pantry and you'd see rice from, a company or, Bisquick or different types. Like you will see these prepared and processed foods on the shelves of food pantries because that's the food that's available to the food banks and pantries at discount because the corporations get a tax break for making the donation, right? And so the food bank buys the food cheaply at cost and then passes it along to people essentially for free, right? So that's circular dollars. So there are now food banks and organizations who are adopting just the good food purchasing principles in their own purchasing. There are folks like the Roundtable that are working at the city or large scale city and or state level to find ways to purchase more directly from local producers. And some of that's happening at the Feeding America state level. So the Austin Food Bank is another one where they've redirected a lot of their food purchases to food producers within several hundred miles of Austin, right? So that the food that's available in the pantry is not just those processed foods. And some of it's also this realization that more families want access to fruits and vegetables and not just sundry items. So that's another piece of it. But there's the National Produce Prescription Coalition, the National Sustainable Agricultural Coalition, and the Good Food Purchasing folks all have programs that also look at sort of those nonprofit opportunities for people to access food.
Thank you. We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions. So I know we didn't talk too much about it, but your book, At the Table, A Chef's Guide to Advocacy, I have yet to read it, but someone in the comments, they really enjoyed it. It's on my to read list. And I'm curious, there was a question from Stephen about if edible weeds are becoming popular in chef circles. And I was just going to switch gears slightly and ask if there's any like chef trends maybe that are focused on sustainability that you've been seeing and want to uplift for any of the chef viewers that are tuning in tonight.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with that you mean foraging and not the other weed, but but chefs are sort of some of the original foragers, right? Like looking in terms of like reaching a broader audience, right? I highly recommend if you don't follow her to follow the Black Food Forager, this amazing young woman, millennial woman who is a practicing forager. There's an emerging foraging coalition that's coming. But certainly there's lots of folks on the chef community that focus on foraging or looking at all different alternative uses for things that we don't normally eat or access in the grocery store or even at the farmer's market. In terms of like a way, it sounds like you guys are going to maybe hear from or have heard from Anthony Mint from Zero Food Waste, Zero Food Print, which is he's a chef. He had a restaurant in San Francisco, but he's also the leader of the declimatizing of restaurants. So looking at how restaurants can go to zero waste, zero energy usage, and is also responsible for a government program that is a checkoff for restaurateurs in California and Colorado, and soon to expand to other states, where you at the restaurant will pay an additional dollar. That dollar goes into a dedicated fund, and that fund helps fund farmers' transitions to regenerative agriculture. And so there are lots of things like that that chefs are leading. I love the work that he's doing. I love the work that Adrienne Lipscomb does. She's one of the board chairs of an all-Black cultural organization focused on cultural foodways. Zella Palmer runs the Duke Ellington School down in New Orleans at Dillard, a historically Black college, and she has one of the most amazing food programs in historical foodways, especially Southern foodways. So I would encourage you to look at those. If food as medicine is something, is like that's your jam, like looking at produce prescriptions or how we can help people make a transition and improve their health outcomes. There's a organization, there's a guy out of Sacramento by the name of Santana Diaz who runs the food program for the entire UC system. So the UC health system. So like there are so many amazing, innovative thinkers out there that are focused on everything from, how to sell people on the idea of foraging to how to get a heart patient to eat healthier when they leave the hospital and even before they get to the hospital. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Katherine. I think we're going to switch to closing out, but I just want to say thank you again for speaking, and I have a lot more resources to follow up with, so we really appreciate you taking the time today.
No, it's my pleasure. I love that somebody read the book and heard that Food Dignity podcast. So whoever that is, the anonymous attendee, it's great. And just, I would say that I'm amazed that you got 200 and some odd people to show up on a Tuesday night to listen to somebody talk about food. So that just makes my heart so warm. So many, many thanks to Benedict and Taylor and Shiloh and you, Sammy, and everybody at this program, because it's much needed, and I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. So thank you.
Thank you, Katherine.
So I have the pleasure of letting you know what's up next week. We have our food waste panel, who will include John Kent from Sanctuary Farms, Renee Wallace, who's the executive director at I'm sorry, I'm looking at another sheet here and my notes got jumbled up here, but she's a entrepreneur, works with entrepreneurs, facilitative leader and business consultant, and has been working to advance composting and the area of food waste. There's Hajime Sato, who is a chef out of Detroit, and Jamina Shupak, the executive director of Rich Earth Institute in Vermont, will be joining us for a panel on food waste next week. Sammy, did you want to say a few words about the Zero Waste Week, or Taylor?
I can speak a little bit to this. We will be participating in the Zero Waste Week. It just so happened that next week panel happens at the exact time as Zero Waste Week. So there are ways to engage here and to win prizes. You can engage with programming and opportunities kind of across the university. So you see that link there, zerowaste.org/UMich. Or you can go to their Instagram at zerowaste_UMich, especially for students, since you will already be here. This is an exciting way to engage with broader initiatives around zero waste and food waste prevention on campus. We will also have, hopefully, a lot of extra community members tuning in who are participating in this program next week.
And then lastly, we just want to send out another reminder that there's a lot of great opportunities coming up at the campus farm, internship opportunities, including Indigenous Foodways internship, native plants internship, and a lot of different positions working throughout the campus farm. The applications for those are due by March 2nd. You can find more information on the course site. We've put up a flyer. You can also use the code there to access the site or to go on to the Mathi Botanical Gardens website. And with that, we'll say good evening and see you next week. Thanks again, Katherine.
Thanks, Katherine. Take care, everybody.